Get ready to enter a brave new world with your host, Vasant Dar.
Brave New World is supported by the Center for Data Science, or CDS, at NYU. If your organization is interested in engaging with CDS through student projects, please email cdsindustry@nyu.edu. For more color on the podcast and additional commentary, please subscribe to our newsletter at vasantdar.substack.com.
Hello and welcome to Brave New World. My guest today is Rick Smolan. It's hard to describe Rick. Photographer doesn't do it justice, nor does journalist, even though that's what he is. I'd describe him as a humanist who descended on the planet with an amazing sense of observation, which he has documented through images and words. He's worked with Life magazine, Time magazine, the New York Times, National Geographic, and other major names in publishing with his striking images and stories. But what's super cool about Rick is the fact that he was played by the actor Adam Driver in a movie called Tracks, which is about an Australian woman, Robin Davidson, walking across the Australian outback. Rick was the photographer that recorded her epic trek. You know you've arrived when a big movie star plays you in a movie. So check out Rick's work. He is a special individual and his work is pretty amazing. Rick, welcome to Brave New World. I am delighted to have you on the show.
I love the title of your show.
Thank you. So Rick, you're a highly decorated individual. You recently were awarded the Ellis Island Award Medal of Honor, which is awesome. So congratulations on that.
I always... Every time someone says Mr. Smolan, I think they're talking about my father. I definitely have been experiencing imposter syndrome, actually most of my life, not just recently, but I feel like I keep stumbling backwards into good luck, and I keep wondering when the bill's coming due.
Yeah, well, you stumbled the right way. So tell us about, just tell us your story, the stumbling, the getting up.
I was painfully shy when I was a kid. I couldn't talk to other people. I had no idea how to talk to strangers. I didn't have very many friends, and I got into ham radio, so I would sit in the basement. I could talk to people through Morse code because I didn't have to make eye contact or anything. And one day my dad gave me a camera when I was about 14, and I found that suddenly with the camera, it changed my personality. It was like my superpower, and I could walk up to strangers, girls in particular, 14, and have an excuse to talk to people. And so I never studied photography, but it was my rabbit's foot kind of thing. And so all of a sudden, everybody wanted me there. After I'm the kid that was left on the bench at every sports team. No one wanted me on their team. I couldn't catch, I couldn't throw, I couldn't do anything. But with the camera, I would make other people look good. And so suddenly I was popular because I was making Sally or Joe look great. So I just wanted to be a photographer. I didn't know what that was, but I just knew that it made me feel good and it gave me a way to interact with people. But my dad didn't want me to be a photographer.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, did he regret giving you that camera?
He said, I'm not sending you to college to take, baby pictures and wedding photos. You're going to be a doctor or a lawyer or something you can actually earn a living at. Yeah. Photography is not a career. It's a hobby. But it made me feel good. And so it's all I wanted to do. So he wouldn't let me go to any college with a photography program. It was like the opposite of what are the requirements. Yeah. So I went to a college called Dickinson College and, went to my art professor the first week and said, do you have a photography program? I knew they didn't. And he said, no, we don't. I said, could I create my own major? And he said, no one's ever asked us that before. What would it be? I said, well, I don't know. I could do, in English class, I could photograph my friends, and in geology, I could photograph rocks. And somehow they let me create my own photography major. So within a week, I was doing what my dad was adamantly against.
Wow, Carlisle, PA.
You remember? Yes.
My daughter went to Dickinson.
Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah, this is such a small world. So she actually started in Dickinson, and then she ended up graduating from NYU.
Why did she transfer?
Well, that's
another story. I really enjoyed Dickinson.
Yeah.
And then the same art professor, one day said, have you ever I was taking pictures for the yearbook, and he said, there's this guy named Jack Korn. I remember the name is so distinctive, in Tennessee, and he and his wife run a photo agency. I said, what's that? He said, well, you put a bunch of your pictures in a box, send it to him, and he'll sell them for you. I said, to who? And he said, like textbook publishers, religious magazines, and newspapers. I said, pictures I've already taken of my friends. He goes, yeah, just try it. So I sent this guy a box of pictures, and he started sending me checks. And I was like,
Wow.
I was 19 years old, and suddenly I was getting thousands of dollars for pictures I shot of my friends on the beach, drinking or looking sad or whatever. So,
Yeah.
I've never had a job my whole life. I basically have been self-employed since I was 18.
Wow. So, I mean, you obviously had something special, right? To be able to attract someone's attention with your pictures when you were 19
Well,
and get
again,
yourselves all the checks. So what was it? Like, what was it that was special about your pictures way back then? I mean, I've seen a lot of your pictures and they're pretty amazing, but what was it that you think was really special about your pictures?
Because I didn't know how to talk to other people. And I was, even with my camera, I was still shy. I was like always the outsider looking in. And I thought if I watch other people enough, I'll learn how to do it. I found it's like weird to think the thing that in my mind was a handicap became my strength, right? Because I was always watching people and observing, and I noticed patterns. This is a fun thing I do with my kids. When you get into an elevator and there's 3 people there, and then a fourth person's, the door opens on another floor and the fourth person gets in, everybody divides the space in half. And once you tell somebody this, it's so funny to watch. Yeah. People don't know they're doing it. Yeah. And like the number of people, it's just the next time you're in an elevator, watch, and people move. So I'm an observer.
I'm laughing because this is so cultural, isn't it? Right. So you would probably see this in the US, where, and you're a world traveler, but you probably wouldn't see this in India.
No, right? Or China.
Or China, right? It's like a different sense of space, right? Whereas here, you would sort of automatically.
It's a weird politeness.
You sort of automatically rearrange yourself to give people maximum space, right? It's almost like people have this algorithm going through their head.
But it's true, but they don't know they're doing it. Yeah, that's the funniest. Well, I told my kids about this once, and now they're like, every time we get in an elevator, it's a fun thing for us to do, and we all look at each other and we crack up, and nobody knows what it is we're laughing about. But these, as a very shy person, the camera gave me this way of being. I was always an outsider, but I was always observing everybody. And even later in life, my wife would say, "Could you put the camera down and actually be with your family? Because you're documenting it, but you're not here."
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to not have the camera always between me and the world.
Yeah, yeah. But, coming back to sort of what I was asking about, like what made your picture special, was it, like some combination of that you just understood light and optics and the physics, and then sort of, I guess, combined it with the moment?
How would you... Again, it's a little like asking a fish to describe water, because I've been swimming in this world since I was 14 years old. But I mean, I think if I ask you what green looks like, you can't be inside my head. So we think we both know what green looks like, but maybe you see green differently than me. So I see patterns. I see, the reason I was mentioning that I've had 5 cups of coffee today, if you're wondering why I'm sounding so speedy. I love watching the way people in spaces, without knowing it, orient themselves into like there's a pattern that I see of people just walking down the street, and then suddenly I'll see people in 5 places where the space between them is exactly the same. Yeah. So I'm always looking for that. There's a sense of design and spontaneity and people relating to each other that is just, again, I'm jumping around here, but when I was so painfully shy as a kid, I had this I knew it was a crazy idea. It was like a conspiracy theory thing, but I always felt like I was an alien sent here to observe humanity, but not interact. That was my way of rationalizing my inability to relate to other people or talk to people. So I used to go to the playground at night on the swings by myself and ask them to come get me, the aliens come back and take me home, because I obviously don't belong here. I was very lonely as a kid, but somehow that loneliness and sense of otherness became my greatest strength of just watching people and then documenting their lives. People fascinate me. And it was, again, back to my father. My father said, okay, you want to be a photographer, but you're going to end up working for some little tiny newspaper somewhere. And then maybe when you're 50 or 60 years old, you'll get a shot at the big time. And so my first job was Time Magazine. Like I took my yearbook to Time Magazine, if you can believe this, and got hired. Again, you were
I know.
saying,
I was watching one of your. I think maybe it was one of your TED talks. So you mentioned that you went in through the service elevator.
yeah,
Or something.
that was actually Life magazine. Yes,
Okay, okay,
yeah. But I mean, my dad said like that the world doesn't work this way. I don't know what you did, but how did you?
Yeah,
You never went to school for photography, and you got hired. Your first job was Life magazine. Like,
yeah. What's the story?
and
Like,
my problem was, and this relates back to the imposter syndrome from Ellis Island, is every time I got a job, I'd go, this is so cool. I'm going to work for Life, or I'm going to work for Time or National Geographic. And then 5 minutes later, I'd go, oh God, they're going to find out I'm a total imposter. I don't know what I'm doing. I never studied photography. I'm going to screw it up. It'll be the end of my career. So I would always have this, it was like almost like bipolar, right? I mean, it's like I'm so high and like, oh my God, I'm so scared. And the terror of the fact that when you're a freelancer, every job could be your last, right? If you screw up, the photo editors want to hire you if you make them look good. So if they give you a job and you don't come back with the goods, you never get hired again from that magazine. So every job literally is your career is on the line with every job. And I didn't know that I'm an adrenaline junkie. I'm much better when I'm terrified. When I relax and I think I've got this, that's when I totally screw up.
yeah. No, it's funny you say that because I tell people, I've been teaching for 40 years, but I still get nervous, when I walk into the classroom.
Well, they say even actors do.
Yeah.
Like performers, musicians. You think how could this musician or this performer be nervous? But they are.
Yeah. No, I'm always concerned. It's like I get pretty stressed out before class, like especially the hour before class. It's like, do I really have it? And if it's a 3-hour class, I just, it's stressful. It never goes away.
Do you experience flow at all? Do you know what flow is?
No, tell me.
So
I do, but I've forgotten.
So whether it's an athlete or a photographer or an artist or a musician, there's a mental state that I didn't know what it was. I experienced it, but I didn't know there was a word for it. It's called flow, where you're unaware of yourself. Yeah. You're so into the thing you're doing. You're no longer thinking I'm doing this thing. Yeah. You're just doing it. Yeah. And for me, when I was photographing, the first 45 minutes of a day, I'd be very self-conscious. Like, is this person going to get angry? And like, I wonder if that came out okay. And then suddenly it's 7 hours later. And if you asked me, what did you photograph today? I would go, I would go completely blank. Yeah. And it was like I was in the moment without thinking about what it was I was doing. And athletes talk about that. Swimmers talk about it. Runners, like it's almost like a runner's high kind of thing where you suddenly you slow down, your heart stops, goes, even though you're running like crazy, you get that second wind thing.
I certainly feel that way in the middle of something and I'm not aware and suddenly 3 hours.
The teaching's like that too, I bet.
And this happens to me, that suddenly like, where did the time go? But I have become more careful about what I say because it's so much easier to get into trouble now.
Oh God, yeah.
Because, I used to say all kinds of things just, with humor. I mean, and that's the other thing, it's like one's self-perception versus the way other people perceive you, like I always viewed myself as having a sense of humor. And, I thought I was like, funny. A couple of my research assistants, worked for me for a few years and one of them was leaving and she gave me a memory stick and it was Darth Vidar. And I was like, what is this? She said, well, we gave you this nickname because you always look so serious. I was like, really? It's so at odds with my self-perception. But teaching now, I'm just much more aware that I've got to be careful because it's so much easier to offend people.
Oh, yeah. Now everything's so fragile and all you need is one person that and it's them misinterpreting what you said too.
Yeah, that's right. I totally get it. I get the whole need to be more sensitive, but it's just gone. It's become so sensitive.
Yeah, the pendulum has swung a little too far, I think, in that direction.
Way too far. And my colleague Jonathan Haidt talks about it also, in his the coddling of the American mind.
Yeah.
And so he's got a sort of a larger theory around this phenomenon, which I think is really interesting.
I think it's dangerous because I think you should be exposed to things that upset you and disturb you and make you think or offend you or whatever, because the real world doesn't try to not offend you.
That's true. It's true. Although, I don't know how you feel about this, but the real world has become a lot softer these days compared to, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 years ago where people would say exactly what was on their mind.
Yeah. But at least you knew what they were thinking.
Yeah, right. So Rick, you've had some very impactful projects that you've done. You've got these, pretty amazing coffee table books that weigh 20 pounds, that
Yes.
have these amazingly rich,
Redistributing the weight of the planet.
yes, right,
One book
these
at a time.
amazingly rich, colorful images. So let's talk about a couple of these, and in particular, I want to talk about your book on, the good fight, America's struggle for justice, and the human face of big data.
Yeah.
So let's take those in any order, because I just want to go into each of these. And
So let me back up for 1 second, which is, I was always much younger than most of the other photographers that I met when I was out working for Time and Life and Newsweek and National Geographic. I was always sort of the baby of the group. And all the men and women that I met around the world, we were all competing with each other when there was a typhoon would hit Guam, or the Prime Minister of Australia was coming to Japan or whatever. Yeah. But when you weren't shooting, it was like a family. Mm-hmm. So if you work for Newsweek and I work for Time, it's every man and woman for themselves when you're out in the field. But in between, and there's a lot of waiting time, these are the men and women who you hang out with and you drink with and you talk about your lives with. So I would hang out with these older, wiser people that were my heroes. A lot of them I'd grown up admiring. I couldn't believe I was in the company of these men and women. And I'd be everybody go out drinking. I'm not a big drinker, but if I wanted to hang out with my heroes, I have to be in a bar. So I'm with these men and women, and they do nothing but bitch and moan and whine about their editors. I hate that editor. I hate this magazine. It's like, guys, this is the coolest job in the world. Someone's paying us to fly around the world and meet prime ministers and go to wars and hang out of planes and rent helicopters for $400, and they're paying us for this. And you guys are complaining. And they said, well, kid, once you're out here, you'll understand. And I said, understand what? And they said, we want our pictures to change the things we're photographing. We want to upset people and shock them and disturb them and expose, injustice. And when they're picking up the magazines, very often it looks like connect the dot photographs, like their editors back in New York or Tokyo or Paris or London had a preconceived idea of the story. They sent the photographers out, and then very often we got out there and they were wrong. There was something else happening. We discovered something they didn't know about. Mm-hmm. And you send these pictures back, and they used all the most, predictable, mundane, pictures that, why did you even send us out there? Yeah. And so they said, look, we just wish that we had more control over how our pictures were used or selected, which ones they used. So I naively said, well, why don't we do a project ourselves with no editors? And they said, like what? And I said, well, I worked on this Life magazine issue called One Day in the Life of America. I said, I was living in Australia at the time when I was in Bangkok talking to all these photographers. And I said, what if we could find a way to bring 100 of you, all of my heroes, to Australia? And we would spread around the country, and we'd say, on the mark, it said, go, you've got 24 hours on one day. So all these older, wiser photographers said, yeah, kid, you go organize it and we'll come. And it's 2 a.m. We're all drunk in a bar. So everybody thought that would be the end of that conversation, but I'm a little obsessive. So I went out and met with publishers, and I said, the world's best photographers in Australia for one day, the Olympics of photography. And every publisher said, what a stupid idea. Like, who's going to buy a book for $50 that your friends take on a day that nothing happens in some godforsaken country like Australia? Who would care? Who would buy that book? Why would they buy it? How many kangaroos are going to be in the book? So I went to the Prime Minister of Australia, who I'd photographed a bunch of times, and he was always, for some reason, I had hair down to here. I was this weird hippie American kid. All the other Australian journalists were, suit and tie, and I always loved beads and leather bands, and I guess I amused him or something. And so I went and saw him, got a meeting, and I said, look, I love your country. I've traveled all over Australia. I think it's the most amazing place. I want to bring 100 photographers here on one day and do a day in the life of Australia. Could you pay for it? Because no publisher will, but the publishers all think I'm crazy. And he said, I don't have that kind of money. I don't have a budget to do that. He said, but I'll help you. And I said, don't be polite. He said, no, I'm not being polite, but I'm going to give you an idea. And boy, was it a great idea. He said, I'm going to set up meetings for you with the CEO of Qantas, the CEO of Kodak Australia, the CEO of Hertz, of Hyatt Hotels, this guy, Steve Jobs, setting up this computer company in America. And I said, why do I want to talk to some computer guy? Like, why would I want to talk to business people? He said, Rick, you're going to ask them for free airline tickets and free film and free computers and hotel rooms and computers. And I said, they're just going to give me this for free because I'm a nice guy. He goes, no, because you're going to put their logo on the first page of your book. I said, I'm a journalist. I can't do that. And I remember him rolling his eyes going, Rick, it's like a PBS special. It's like the following book is made possible through the generosity of blah, blah, blah. And it was the whole idea of sponsored books. No one had ever done sponsored books. So it didn't occur to me that if the Prime Minister of Australia sets up a meeting for you, people are inclined to listen.
And in fact, you apparently, if I'm right, I read something. You just walked into Apple and asked for an appointment to see Steve Jobs, and you did.
And he actually. That's a funny story too. I waited 2 hours I had just showed up. I went to his office and they said, do you have an appointment? I said, no, but, Apple helped me on this project in Australia. And they said I should come in. I was making this stuff up. And, so we waited 2 hours and this kid walks out. I remember I was like reading something and I saw somebody walk up and they had, sneakers, no socks and jeans. So before I looked up, I thought it was some guy coming out to tell us, sorry, he can't see you. And I looked up and it was Steve Jobs. And he said, you're the guys from Australia? I said, I'm American, but yeah. He goes, all right, come here. I got 5 minutes. What is it? What do you want? And so, we went back in his office and I pitched this whole idea of using Macintosh, paying everybody with Macintoshes. And I said, look, I can get Macs into Time, Newsweek, Paris Match, London, Sunday Times, Asahi Shimbun. I can pay all the photographers with Macs. Yeah. And so we actually embedded Macs into all these news organizations.
Wow.
To our project.
Yeah. So that meeting with the Prime Minister was really fortuitous.
Oh, he was, Malcolm
airline,
Fraser.
The hotel.
I had no money. Yeah. And I told the photographers, I can't pay you. I can get you here. I can give you an airline ticket and film but I have no money. And everybody said, oh, it sounds like so much fun. Let's go. Yeah. And then, 2 years later, I sent $1,000 to every photographer. So we made enough money from that first book. You wouldn't think spending $100,000 would feel so good, but no one ever thought they'd ever get paid. Yeah. I said, if we ever make any money on this book, we're going to give you a third of what we make. And I had a partner, David Cohn was my partner.
And that really took off, right? Day in life off. I mean, you had Gorbachev ask you to come do a...
Well, I wanted to go back to being a photographer because it was really stressful trying to run a company and organize. I mean, every photographer, it's like herding cats. Every one of these men and women, they were the Pulitzer Prize winner in their country and they were the most famous. And suddenly they're all I'm trying to coordinate all this. And, the fact that I even survived the first project, I actually got to a point where I wanted to call it off because, it got so out of control. We kept running up bills, which you had no way of paying. And it was like having somebody hold a gun to your head saying, make this book a bestseller or you're going to jail. The other thing that happened is, it didn't occur to me that if Kodak and Apple and Hertz and Qantas give you free stuff, they all decided when the book came out to run ad campaigns saying, we're so proud to be the official computer or airline or film of Rick's project. And so I stumbled backwards into a multi-million-dollar advertising campaign for my book. Yeah. And they were doing it for their own reasons. And then I also thought we're never going to get reviewed. I mean, who's going to do it? I got turned down by every publisher. So I thought the media would also say, who cares? But it was the opposite. The media loves doing stories about the media. Right? It's like, it's this, these 100 photographers descended on Australia and we almost went bankrupt and it almost didn't work. We got turned down, the drama of it. So suddenly we had Time and Newsweek literally fighting over who was going to pay us the most to put our book on the cover of their magazine. So every project we did was the cover of Time, Newsweek, Geo, Stern, OG, every country so anyway, I didn't answer your question, but I wanted to go back to being a photographer. But then the governor of Hawaii came to Australia and saw the book, Day in Life Australia, and said, our anniversary of statehood's coming up. Would you do us? And then American Express called and said, would you do Japan? Because we're fighting with the JCB card. And then Gorbachev's office called and said, we saw your book on America. So I never went back to being a photographer. I would have been voted least likely to run anything in high school and college. I'm completely scatterbrained and, I had a D- average in high school.
As you were talking, you said, I never thought I'd be a photographer. In preparing for this conversation, I was obviously researching you and your work and everything. And the question I asked myself was, who does he look like? Who's he the most similar to of people I know, right? Almost right. Remind me of, this movie called The Player, where people pitch an idea and he says, oh, so it's Fatal Attraction
meets
for blah.
The elevator pitch.
Right, the elevator pitch, right? So I was like, how would I describe Rick, in terms of like an elevator pitch? And I could only do it sort of compositionally. I was like, well, he's an amazing photographer, a videographer, a journalist, like a curator. I don't know. It was all of those things put together. But I couldn't find a label for it.
Orchestra conductor. No, it's like a photographic orchestra.
That's reasonable. I hadn't thought of that.
It's like, I'm not playing the instruments. I'm just kind of trying to get all the instruments to coordinate, right? Yeah. The fun thing now is we started out doing, even with even Day Life Australia, we actually did a 1-hour TV special, as if it wasn't crazy enough to be doing this project. I just thought, if I'm going to jail, let's do a movie about it. But the book was very successful. It became the best-selling book in Australian history. And you couldn't buy it in the bookstore. You had to buy it through 6 newspapers. It's a long story, but I found out there was a company down there that was having their anniversary. But every time someone said no to me, it's the best gift anybody ever gave me. Yeah. But if a publisher said yes to me, I would have done one book. An author on a $50 book, it's $1.50. That's all they get paid.
I know. I've been an author.
It's horrible.
I know exactly what it is.
It's horrible, right?
You don't make money writing books.
So the fact that I was forced to come up with an alternative way of publishing books meant, one, I could control it. I could print my books in 6 colors. Most publishers print in 4 colors. Doesn't mean anything to your audience, but it's richer. It's more saturated. People say your books look so different. Why? Well, we use better paper. I spend more on the printing. We have 6 color. We also do something insane, which is most publishers have a designer and they design the book and that's it. And, my sister actually designed the first Day in the Life book and many of the Day in the Life books at the beginning, but we basically designed the book and then we tear the whole thing apart and then we put it back together. We do this like 10 times. It sounds crazy, but it's like, it's never good enough. Like the only reason we ever stop is because of deadlines. We just keep, no matter what I've done, I've always felt it wasn't good enough. I'm highly critical of myself. And so I drive our teams crazy, but it gets better and better and better, right? We keep saying, okay, there's too many of that kind of picture. The layout's wrong. Those pictures don't belong together. I'm sitting in the shower in the morning. It's like I put on blinders and it's all I can think about is that project. And I think that the reason our books have done so well is because of that. I love obsessive people and I am an obsessive person because you keep honing it.
Yeah. So let's talk about these. So actually, let's talk about the human phase of big data.
Oh yeah, sorry, I went off tangent again.
Because I was actually the chief editor of a journal called Big Data for 5 years. Around 2014, 15. But you did your book a few years before that.
2012
or 13.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Uh-huh.
And there was something you in describing that book, and I don't know whether you said this then or later, but you said something like the planet is developing a nervous system, right?
Yeah. Actually, that came from Marissa Mayer, who's an old friend. She was at Google and then she was the CEO of Yahoo. Mm-hmm. And, we met at TED many years ago and she was always somebody I went to and said, can you help me? You understand technology. I don't. And she was a wonderful sounding board. So one day we were talking at TED and she said, so what's your new project? And I said, I don't find anything that exciting. I don't know what to do next. We'd done the global water crisis. We did the first year of the internet. We did the microprocessor. And she said, well, have you looked at big data? And I said, what's that? And she said, well, all of these devices that we're all wearing and carrying now, like we become human sensors. And it's almost like the planet's developing a nervous system and we're all nodes on that system. And it tells, where are you? What are you reading? Who are you talking to? And so she sort of planted this idea in my mind of this idea that we're watching the planet evolve into some kind of consciousness. It sounds very, science fiction-y and silly, but I mean, all the stuff with AI, I love how the microprocessor led to the personal computer, right? Which led to the world of big data. And now the world of big data is leading to AI. Now it's a straight line when we look backwards, but at the time, none of us saw where this was going.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to see this when you're
In the middle of it,
right?
yeah.
And I went to Wall Street in the 90s. I took a few years off from academia, sort of brought machine learning to Wall Street, and I realized that was just way too early. It was way before the internet, and it really took the internet for data to happen. Like,
Well, think about that. Yeah, I mean, if you had talked to somebody in the 50s and said there's this global network. Yeah. That's, I mean, even the fact we had no satellites. I remember with my dad, walking out into our driveway. I was 11 years old and watching the first Sputnik go over. And that was so exciting. The first satellite that ever went up over the planet. And now there's thousands. And this idea that there's now this network around the world, that the internet, I mean, try to explain the world we live in today to somebody from the 50s. There's so many parts of it that we take for granted that would have been unthinkable then. The fact that I can make a free phone call anywhere in the world and talk to anyone in the world instantly, more than 2/3 of the human race now has a cell phone.
Yeah, that's right.
The numbers are astounding. And, so I know we're jumping all over here, but I always wonder if, back to my aliens putting me here on Earth to observe humanity, I always wonder if maybe the reason we're not seeing signs of intelligent life anywhere else in the universe is maybe we evolve into some other form of consciousness, which is no longer, individual entities the way we are. Like, we're all separate beings right now. Maybe, what is it called? The singularity.
Yeah.
Right? Where there's suddenly there's this, I am jumping all over the place here. Do you know, the experiment called titration?
No.
So in chemistry.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So
yeah,
it's a bleaker of clear liquid and a little dropper.
Yeah.
And you go drop, nothing, and the 18th drop, it suddenly turns red.
Right.
And I wonder if all these computers, the internet, all the things we've watched growing over the last, 50 years, that we just added the last drop. And these machines, as we were talking before, are starting to develop a form of consciousness.
Yeah.
And the other thing that has always fascinated me is that once one robot learns something, they all know it. Whereas we pesky humans have to try to pass it on from generation to generation. But
in theory, they never forget it either.
Well, yeah, right.
Whereas with us, there's such a huge loss of knowledge with each generation.
Exactly.
Right? I mean,
or having to learn it again.
Yeah. Because, one of the points you make somewhere is that, maybe it's in the good fight, is that these changes are generational. When I look at some of the pictures from that, right, there's this one picture of, colored entrance, right? You see this black woman and her daughter.
That's my father-in-law's photograph, actually.
And that's not that long ago. I mean,
no, it's not.
I remember that world so clearly, right? It was not that long ago, right, that the world was like that. And, I've had my own experiences, because I had like long hair, long dark, and I look brown. And so, I've like experienced my share of whatever you want to call it, but it wasn't that long ago. And, so you see this sort of, that these differences occur, changes happen over generations, because it just takes a long time we sort of grow up with a set of values that are hard to dislodge once we grow up with them. But I can see that generationally things have changed so dramatically. My father's generation, mine, my kids, just a completely different mindset.
People, if you watch the news now here in America and probably most of the world, it looks like the world's going to hell. Like it feels like things are so awful right now.
I know. And when people when people complain about, whatever it is, like say racism, and I'm saying, look, I get it, right? But right?
Would you rather be in this?
Yeah, just go back like 30, 40, go back to the 60s,
Well, this was the premise. So the Good Fight, America's Ongoing Struggle for Justice, is a big coffee table book. And the premise is, would you rather be Jewish, Muslim, Black, female, gay, disabled, Latino American, or Native American, 100 years ago or today?
Yeah.
And then looking through the eyes of photographers and writers, we show what it was like 100 years ago or over the last 100 years and remind people things may be screwed up right now, but boy, you would have not want to be here 50 years ago.
Yeah. And exactly. And then there's another side to it, which is things may be screwed up here, but they are even worse, so much worse.
The rest of the world.
In other parts of the world.
Many other places, yeah.
And the reason we talk about it is because we hold America to a different standard.
Yeah.
It's just like, things are discussed here that wouldn't come up in other cultures. There are other cultures that are equally racist. I mean, I'd say India, China, like there's a tremendous amount of racism.
Yeah.
This is not restricted to America or white people. It's just, it's quite common, and bigotry is common. So I'm glad you did it, because I think it's important for people to recognize, how much positive change has occurred. There's a long way to go. But
look at the disabled community, just as an example. So one of the chapters in the book, written by Amy Mullins, who actually plays the mother in Stranger Things. She's this wonderful woman. She wrote the essay. It was actually quoted from her TED Talk. But until 1974, there was something primarily in the South called the ugly laws, which is if you were physically disabled in some way that might make someone else uncomfortable because you were missing a leg or missing an eye or whatever, that you could be arrested or fined or hidden away by your family because it made other people uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And then the Paralympic Games, like 4.1 billion people watch these games with guys running with, metal, springs on their legs. And now, Jockey is featuring Marines, missing a leg with orthotics in the ads to talk about patriotism and bravery. I mean, it's the script is completely flipped, where now being disabled is being held up, especially if the cause of your disability is because of something you did that was courageous or brave or whatever. There's so many stories like that where the whole narrative of about a group has been changed. And one of the fun things of working on The Good Fight was, I'm a journalist, right? So seeing the role of the media in initially reinforcing the stereotypes, the movie Birth of a Nation was very racist in the early 1900s. And now you've got, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner and Will and Grace and, basically having people of other groups in your living room at night on your TV, and you go, oh, those people just want to protect their family and fall in love, and their heart's being broken and they're worrying about their children. There's a humanizing and normalization of people introducing themselves to each other through the media that's also been incredibly powerful as a way of moving us towards that goal of equal justice for all. We're not there, obviously, but I think the book kind of reminds you how much astounding progress has been in America towards that.
Yeah, no, so true.
At least until Trump and his cronies.
So let's talk about the big data book. What was your takeaway from that? Like, how long did that project take, and what was your takeaway from the impacts of big data on humanity?
When Marissa first suggested a book about it, I said, well, what is it, like pictures of the Facebook data center? How would you photograph big data? It sounds very cold and clinical and kind of not very emotional. I'm attracted to images that are emotional and stories that are emotional. And she said, no, you won't believe what's happening all over the world. The way that it's almost like we have developed a new microscope that things were right in front of us, but we couldn't collect and analyze the data that we're seeing. So I'll give you one great example. There's a gentleman named Deb Roy who I met at a very small conference one day, and I had a TED bag with me that I brought my books or lunch or something in. And he said, oh, have you been to TED? And I said, yeah, I've been to a lot of the TEDs. And he said, have you ever spoken at it? And I said, yeah, I have once or twice. And he said, I'd like to talk at TED. I said, oh, what would you talk about? And we just sat down to lunch. And he said, well, when my son was born, I recorded his life really intently, and I think it would be an interesting talk. And I thought, oh my God. And he said, can I show you the pictures? And I thought, I'm going to get stuck with this guy throughout all of my lunch, showing me, baby pictures. And then he showed me the most amazing thing. He had put a camera in the ceiling of every room in his house, not the bathrooms, and he recorded for 2 years every time his son heard a word, and from the caretakers, from him, from his wife, from friends, and he documented how children learn to speak. How do you think children learn to speak? What do we all think? What words emerge first? What do you think?
It's funny you asked me this question, because last week I was because some of my colleagues actually do this for a living, right? They attach cameras to kids' heads and watch them move around and see how they learn and what they learn. But of course, we're doing it sort of as scientists. But if you ask me, what were the first words? I don't know. Like, for my daughter, it was like we watched Sesame Street, and her first word was remote.
Okay, but weirdly because she heard the word remote a lot,
yeah.
Right? So that what we all assumed, everybody assumed that the words that children learn first are the words they hear the most often, repetition, right? It's pretty normal to think. Well, his data proves something else. It wasn't repetition, it was context. The more different places you hear the word water, for example, that word will emerge first if the child hears it in lots of different contexts. Even though they may have heard the word remote more often, it's the one with the most context that the child totally starts. So,
Well, that was her other word was water.
yeah, well, water is a very
and juicy water. Anyway.
I wrote to Chris Anderson at TED and said, I just saw the most amazing body of research, and this guy's a really good storyteller. And so I felt like the proud father when he was on stage. But so when we did the human phase of big data, we featured his story in it. And then we also did a 1-hour PBS special, but my brother directed that. But so my sister's a designer and my brother's a filmmaker. So we always wonder what our parents put in our milk growing up. But Sandy, my brother, did this amazing video visualization of Deb Roy's work. And it gives you goosebumps when you realize how, and Deb talks about the fact that big data is like a microscope, allowing us to see things that were right around us, but being able to collect this data and model it in a way that gives us a new lens on human behavior, on life on Earth. It's just absolutely fascinating. So the whole book to me was actually very emotional and surprisingly emotional.
Interesting. Just to sort of complete the story, I was telling you about some of my colleagues and putting cameras and recording stuff. So the one thing I learned last week was that toddlers actually, when they're looking at multiple objects, they position themselves optimally. So they actively move their heads so that they get the best visual on the object of interest.
Really?
Yeah. It's amazing. You were talking about your elevator thing and people sort of automatically disperse, right?
Yeah.
It's almost like that's like a thing it's like a general learning mechanism, which is if you want to observe something, put yourself in a position so that you can observe it well.
Well, it's like flowers that you don't realize the flowers actually move towards the sun.
Yeah.
Like, because they move slowly. But I remember somebody did a time lapse once when I was a kid. I was like, really? The flowers can actually move to get more sunlight? It's very similar to what you're saying about the kids, right?
It's probably just sort of endemic to all living things. That you have this mechanism to acquire information, and you just sort of figure out that the best way to look at something is to put yourself in the position where you're able to see it best. And get other objects out of the way and stuff like that. Fascinating.
Well, there's a picture in the human face of big data at the very beginning of a group of people gathered around a baby. And the baby is lit by all the devices. It's a video camera and a still camera, and it looks like an old chiaroscuro painting from Italy from the 15th century. But the baby is all lit, and it's a beautiful, beautiful picture. It's by a French photographer. I forget her name, but it's one of my favorite pictures in the book. It's on the back cover of the book too.
Okay, all right. I will look at that when I get back. I do have that.
So one of the fun things with that book. To the creative side is creating the book and the movie, but we had this idea of what if we delivered that book to 10,000 of the most influential people on Earth the same morning, like all over the world. Yeah. So that was my pitch to EMC, who is our sponsor. Mm-hmm. So a friend of mine knew Fred Smith at FedEx and got me a meeting with his number 2. And FedEx agreed to contribute delivering 10,000 books for free to world leaders, Fortune 500 CEOs, heads of media companies, Pulitzer Prize winners, Olympic winners. Yeah. And then Jeff Bezos agreed to do all the packaging. So FedEx said, we'll deliver it for free, but we're not going to put the books in a box and put a label on it. That's not our business. Yeah. Our business is delivering it. Yeah. So then I went to Jeff and I asked if he and his team would help us get this look at this. Again, the whole idea is that our planet's developing a nervous system. We want people in really interesting places to be talking about this. So Amazon did the packaging, FedEx did the shipping. The hardest part was, how do you determine who the 10,000 most influential people on Earth are? I mean, and it's so controversial. Like, who do you send it to? Does it go to their assistant? Does it ever reach those people? Yeah. Is there a follow-up?
So how do you decide that? Do you look at Twitter and their follow accounts? So like, what
We
do
had
you
a whole
do?
team of people. We worked with Edelman PR that
Yeah,
helped us
right.
assemble the list, and then of course, EMC went through it to figure out who they wanted on the list. And it was, now when I think back, it was such an act of masochism, like
But
to
you know,
add that.
but you've been amazingly successful at like getting these businesses to contribute what they do best, right?
It's all the
So
prime minister.
and then you're the
It was
orchestrators,
all
right?
Malcolm Fraser, the prime
Yeah, yeah,
minister of
yeah,
Australia's idea.
yeah, right.
Uh, I find that if you meet with the CEO of a company, if you're fortunate enough to get in past all the screeners and all the handlers and all the filters, they try to keep people like me away. I find if you don't ask for something big and imaginative, you've wasted their time. If I go into a CEO's office and say I need $25,000 for a project, it's like, who let this guy in here? Yeah. But if I walk in and say I need $10 million to move your company from fourth place to second place in the big data space, which is what I said to EMC, and it did. It's exactly, they told us afterwards. It actually it had a huge impact on their business. They may laugh you out of the office, but they won't forget the meeting.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean that's awesome advice. I mean that's great advice, right? You walk into your ask should
And
be
don't waste,
commensurate.
exactly.
Yeah,
Do
exactly.
not waste the opportunity, even if you think you're asking for too much.
Yeah.
I just find I failed more often by asking for too little than by asking for too much.
Yeah, no, I totally see where you're coming from. And in fact, some of your stories that I was going through reminded me of sort of the Seinfeld episode, especially when you were
The coffee table
pitching,
book.
the pitching the a day in the life kind of thing,
Yeah.
right? And you're saying people are laughing at it. It reminded me of sort of George and Jerry pitching to NBC, the show,
Well, it's a show about nothing.
nothing,
Right.
right?
It's very meta.
Yeah, exactly, right? And so your response is like, what are you talking about? Like, who's going to buy this book for $50?
Well, remember, who is it that wanted to do the coffee table book where you can screw the legs into the book?
That was Kramer.
Kramer. I know. I had a lot of friends that said, you got to watch this episode. It's like your books. I tell my kids that, I can't wait to go to work every day. I love the fun thing about I still think of myself, you're asking like, what do you call yourself? I still think of myself as a journalist. And the thing I love about being a journalist is I can say, I know nothing about your world. Could you teach me? And Jack Dorsey spent like 3 hours with us one day teaching us about cybersecurity and what he was doing, with Twitter and also with, Square. Now it's called Block. That's why I was having a mental block. I'm always astounded at the people that will, when you say, I want to do a project about your industry, about your business, about your world, but I'm a blank slate. Yeah. Could you teach me? And people are so generous with their time. And obviously I have a track record now of putting a human face on very abstract concepts. So people are willing to help, but I tend to, because every project I do tends to be a different topic completely. Mm-hmm. I feel like I'm, the myth of Sisyphus. I've now got to roll this thing back to the top of the hill again because the sponsors that help me on big data are not going to help me on the future of food or, whatever the next project is.
If you were doing the big data thing now, right, would it be about AI? Would it be about sort of how AI is sort of becoming the nervous system of the planet? Because when I saw that quote, I was like, wow, like fast forward 10 years, right? Data is still happening. I mean, it's growing exponentially, but it's happened, right? Big data has happened and it's continuing to grow. But it's really sort of the grist for AI, right? AI as we know it wouldn't have emerged.
Exactly. No,
big data, right?
Each of these is like a layer that needs to be there for the next to be on top of it.
Yeah. So if you do it today, would it be about AI? Would you be talking about it?
AI would have a big part of it. I think the challenge right now, someone said to me, why don't you do a day in the life of AI? And the problem is that it is evolving so quickly. I don't think we've ever seen anything like this. I mean, there's no curve anymore. This is like a straight vertical line. I mean, every day there's 300 companies announcing, there's a wonderful app that I use called Rev, R-E-V. So this interview we're doing now together, if you wanted it transcribed, you just upload this file to Rev, and 5 minutes later you have a transcript of the entire thing. Well, Rev just added something called Rev AI, where it says, not only do I want you to transcribe this entire conversation and also break up the two speakers because they can hear the different voices, but I want you to summarize it and pull out 5 of the most sort of the biggest thoughts in it. And somehow it goes through our conversation.
I know.
It does that. Wow.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, in fact, I've got a research project going where I've gotten my podcasts. I've collected like 60 of them. and I'm trying to get the machine to tell me what are the common themes.
I thought you were going to tell me it learned your voice. It's going to do the next interview by itself without you.
That would be so cool, wouldn't it?
Well, apparently, there's a great podcast I listen to every day called Tech Meme Ride Home. It's like a wonderful sort of 12-minute summary of the day's news and politics and who said what, and this guy Brian, I think Brian McCullough is the host of it.
Yeah.
But there was some app that sampled his voice. And then he said, okay, I'm going to type the script for the show today, but instead of me reading it, I'm going to have my avatar read it. And it was pretty close.
So what's this going to do to journalism
and photography and writing and movies?
And all that kind of stuff, right? What's AI going to do to all of that?
I mean, this is the thing. You feed it all the scripts from Seinfeld and say, okay, create another episode that's never been done before where aliens land and take and duplicate Jerry and everybody on the show. Yeah. And
by the way, to what extent is the writers' strike about this?
Well, it's become a big part of it.
Yeah, because I wasn't quite sure how much this played in it. Like, but, I mean, are they actually talking about ChatGPT in their negotiations?
Yeah. Yeah, they're actually saying we want something in the contract saying that no movies or TV will be using a generative AI to create the scripts. And
this is what the writers want.
Yeah, it's one of the things they want better residuals. My sister-in-law Pamela Reed is a famous actress. She was Arnold Schwarzenegger's partner in Kindergarten Cop, Robin Williams' wife in Cadillac Man, and she now, years later in her 60s, is still getting residual checks from every TV appearance, every movie she was in. Yeah. But now with all the streamers, with Netflix and Amazon Prime and Hulu, Netflix is basically paying a flat one-time fee to license a show, and they're not giving any data about how many people watched it. They're not sharing any of that information with the creators, with the filmmakers, with the directors, and they're not paying royalties, residuals to the actors. And the actors are getting like $1.70 now. It used to, in the old days, every time a show was on TV again, you got 50% of the fee that you got the first time. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And my brother with his movies and my sister-in-law with her movies, they're in their 60s now and they're, still getting a pretty healthy income from their life story. It's like their pension. It's like their Social Security. But now with the streamers, it's been reduced to 5%, not 50%. So it's terrible for the writers and for the actors. And so that's what they're fighting for. They're saying all these companies are making billions of dollars and we are the creatives and we're getting totally screwed.
So, I mean, is this like the writing on the wall here? I mean, this just seems like
the trouble is, on the one hand, if I was putting on my Netflix CEO hat, I might say, well, maybe I can do without writers, or maybe I can hire kids out of school and then get them to ask the prompts the right way.
That's right. It's a question of like the right prompts, and you can, upskill these upstarts really quickly. In fact, that's apparently one of the studies I saw recently about the use of ChatGPT, in a service situation. It actually novices got really up to speed very quickly. There was a study by Eric Brynjolfsson and some of his colleagues, which I thought was interesting but not surprising. And I can imagine that, with these tools, you could get a novice and get them up to speed and at a pretty good level pretty quickly.
There's actually chat wranglers now, or whatever they call them, where they're paying. I heard there's a job for $300,000 a year for you to be able to be the person that writes the best prompts to get the best responses from these engines. As somebody who loves technology, I found it delightful. And do you remember the first time you ever went on the internet? Do you remember your first experience?
Yeah.
Tell me, what was your first time?
So it was pretty horrible, right? Because I've grown up with the internet.
Right? So what year?
So so initially I was using it for like file transfers, right? So it was just like very
before
low
it
tech.
was.
Yeah. And then when the browser came out, right? So that was kind of when it became sort of retail, right? And one of my PhD students went for an interview. He was graduating. He went down to, I think it was like Prudential or something for an interview, and he showed them what he was doing, which was the Edgar project, which actually started at NYU in my department.
Yeah.
And he was showing them like what they were doing with the Edgar filings. And he said that they asked me, like, did you write this software? And I said, yeah, of course I wrote the software. And they said, wow, that's amazing. And then when he came back, he realized that they were asking about the browser. They'd never seen a browser before. Right. That was the first time they saw Mosaic browser.
Yeah, right.
So that was my sort of first experience too. It was one of these really crappy Excite or Alta Vista, one of these browsers that kind of did the best. It sort of gave you
yeah.
something, which was still pretty impressive, right? Because my expectations were so low of any of this stuff that I was amazed that it would throw up anything even remotely relevant, right? So that was my sort of first experience.
Did you know Bill Atkinson?
Yes.
So Bill was at Apple. He wrote HyperCard, which was the first experience most people had with links.
Yeah.
You clicked on the link and it took you somewhere else. So one day in probably 94, somebody told me you should download this thing called Mosaic, the web browser. And I said to my wife, I'm going to go to the office and pick some stuff up and I'll be back in half an hour. I was living in California then. So I went to the office and then I said, there was the thing my friend told me. So I downloaded the Mosaic. And 6 hours later, I was sitting in the dark. I remember it was a Sunday night, and my wife called and said, "Where the hell are you?" I said, I don't know. She says, "What do you mean? Are you okay?" I said, "I don't know where I am." And she says, "Wait, Rick, I need to call a doctor." I had fallen down the rabbit hole. I had, you click and it takes you to this, and then there's 5 links. And then I remember that same thing of like flow again.
Yeah.
I was so lost. It was so fascinating and mesmerizing and hypnotic and delightful. And I had the exact same experience the first time I tried ChatGPT. That same thing of, this is so cool. Oh my God, I'm going to try this. I'm going to try. What if I tell it, take that, but make it humorous?
Yeah.
A friend and I were also, it's interesting that the very first use of generative AI that most people that I know had last November was DALL-E, and Stable Diffusion, and the fact that the first use of AI was artistry or art or visualization.
Yeah.
I would have never thought that would have been the first. Everybody thought it's going to be gene
Something
sequencing
repetitive.
or proton. What do you call it? Protein sequencing, right? And folding, which is they're obviously doing, but for the average public. As a photographer, I was typing in, create a picture like my father-in-law, Elliot Erwitt, with the Eiffel Tower with people dancing in front of it. And it was pretty crude in the last November, but now, oh my God, in 6 months, it actually looks like a photograph someone shot for National Geographic. It's the speed with the enhancements have happened so quickly in this. Somebody the other day said, is AI going to wipe out all of our jobs? I mean, am I out of business? And I said, the best quote I've heard about this, and I'm sure you've heard this, is that AI may not wipe out your job, but someone using AI will replace you. It's like it's having the most incredible personal assistant that will do first drafts for you. Mm-hmm. I think I still want to write the proposal. I was doing a business proposal for another book the other day. Normally would have taken me 2 weeks. I was taking old proposals and trying to update it and doing research. And then I went to ChatGPT just for the hell of it and said, write me a proposal about, blah, 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 and give me 100 assignments for photographers. And I hit enter and I sat there with my mouth open, this thing, and it wrote this brilliant, wonderful, thought-provoking, eloquent with a budget and a schedule and 100 assignments. Yeah. And then I said, regenerate. And it did a completely different one.
I know, it just blows my mind.
Oh my God. Yeah. I did it 10 times and then I cut and pasted amongst all the pieces and it came out. It literally took me 4 hours to do something that would have taken me weeks.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I know. I mean, this is like being a kid in a candy store.
Yeah.
I've tried
it's
so
so
many things
fun.
with that. I mean, I even tried to tell her to make a tenure case for someone and it did. Not that I would ever use it, of course.
I was thinking of Joe Biden and what's happening with the debt crisis right now, right? And the Republicans trying to use the debt, paying our existing debt as a cudgel or as a extortion to undo his agenda, what he's accomplished so far.
Yeah.
And so I went to chat just for a friend of mine is actually one of his speechwriters. So I said to her, Biden should say that if we default on our debt, it's the best gift he could it's the best gift the Republicans could give to the Chinese because the Chinese would love to see the dollar weaken and the yuan strengthened, right? So she said, "Oh, that's a really it's an interesting idea. Thank you." And then I actually went to ChatGPT and I said, "Write a speech by Biden talking about why allowing our country to default would be this incredible gift to China." And I said, and also add in something add an example. And I actually took this from Scott Galloway, our friend. Scott said a few weeks ago on Pivot that what if the Democrats, when Trump was president, said we're not going to agree to raise the debt ceiling unless Republicans allow us to ban all assault weapons and make abortion legal in all 50 states. It's exactly the same thing they're trying to do right now, right? Well, you can't do it legislatively. You use the debt ceiling as like a weapon, and you weaponize this idea of our national debt.
Yeah.
So I put this into ChatGPT, and it just wrote this. It said, "Well, folks," I mean, I said, write it in Joe Biden's voice, and it was. I mean, it even had his little folksy things, and the way that he phrases things. It was. She totally cracked up. I sent her and said, like, I said, I didn't write this. This was ChatGPT, but it was really astounding.
I know it's you can't tell. I mean, I gave a talk to a bunch of executives a few weeks ago about the impact of AI on banking, how they should think about it. And of course, prior to going in there, I asked ChatGPT. I was like, if you were to pick two dimensions along which people would think, what would they be? And it was pretty darn good.
Yeah. I also the strain. I mean, there's parts of it that are also delightful, which I'm sure a lot of people wouldn't agree with me, but this idea of hallucinations, the fact that they call it that ChatGPT will write something with incredible certainty and even create fake references to for research papers that don't exist. Right. And the fact that someone called this hallucinations, which is again very anthropomorphic.
Yeah, that's right.
Is just absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
The thing that I worry about, and this is like, I was thinking the other day, a great double feature drive-in. I don't know did you ever go to drive-in movies?
I did. In fact, we used to go to drive-ins in Addis Ababa when I was a kid.
Really?
Yeah, my dad was a military attaché there. And that used to be one of my favorite things to do in the evening.
I think the world misses out on not having drive-in movies.
Oh, tell me about it.
My father once, those in your audience who are probably too young to remember this, that you would go to a drive-in movie, you'd park your car, all the cars facing a huge screen outside in a field, whatever. Yeah. And then they had these little stands with speakers where you would roll the window down a little bit, and it had a hook that goes over the window because everything was hardwired, right? And I remember we went to a drive-in once, and my dad forgot to unhook the speaker, and so he drove away, and it ripped our window out. And it was like one of those moments you never forget as a kid. But we'd all fall asleep in the back seat of the car. But I was thinking a great double feature drive-in would be Her and Ex Machina. Have you seen both of those?
I have.
Just in context of where we are now with AI. And my worry right now is that just the way we saw with Cambridge Analytica and the ability to tailor messages for people and deceive them and lie to them because you know a lot about them. My worry now is that with generative AI, you could create 5 million, 100 million personally crafted messages to every voter, playing on their prejudices, what they've posted before, where they travel to, and the vulnerabilities that each of us have, and manipulate us to vote or not vote for a candidate or for a particular set of legislation. And it would be imperceptible. You got yours and I got mine. So unless we were comparing it.
Exactly.
And we're gotten to a point where, I'm not an election denier at all, but I can see a way where what was basically baby steps, during the Trump administration running for office, which, his boys were, working with Cambridge Analytica, and trying to create these, messaging, can be done in such a more nuanced way now. 6 years later, it's like, oh my God.
Absolutely. In fact, when I was looking through your books, The Good Fight and The Human Face of Big Data, and I was looking at all the captions, right? I was thinking like, wow, I wonder if what we'll see in not so distant a future is personalized captions for you. Yeah. Right? You see an image and a caption appears that appeals to you. Right?
Yeah.
As opposed to like
it's mass personalization on a level that we thought was unimaginable just 10 years ago.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know,
So how do you feel about all this? You were talking about your son who's going to go work for this on a movie in Budapest.
Yeah.
I'm so envious. So how do you like? What are the conversations
Okay,
you're
I'm a
having?
glass.
Are you having a conversation at all about like what kind of a
Oh,
future
sure.
this is?
Yeah, we talk about, my son and I talk about this all the time. He's fascinated by technology. I'm a glass half full person, so I tend to be excited by all these new toys and new technologies and new abilities and capabilities. It's interesting hearing Sam Altman and other people in that space, even Elon Musk, who I've lost all respect for recently, who I always thought was, sort of Tony Stark.
Mm-hmm.
They've all been warning about the dangers of AI for years, and I thought that was interesting. But now that AI is actually here, my worry is that we need to put, it's sort of like the horse is out of the barn and we're still trying to close the barn door. I'm worried that bad actors in other countries or just bad actors not even associated with a particular country have the ability now. It's like children playing with nuclear bombs and not knowing what they're doing with it. Even the people at Google have said, we don't totally understand what we've created here.
Yeah.
And we're not quite sure how to control it. And someone said the other day there's like a 10% chance of AI, having a really huge negative impact on humanity. Again, I'm going to keep going back to my aliens looking at Earth thing. But if you were aliens coming to Earth from another planet, and maybe think of AI for that as a sort of a cipher for that or a stand-in. We human beings may look like an invasive species that's strangling the planet. We're killing each other, we're polluting the water, we're polluting the air, we're overpopulating, we're doing terrible things to each other. And if you were like an intelligent species or even an AI, and you say, well, what's the best thing for the planet? It may not be us.
Yeah.
I worry about who's writing. We already know that algorithms are prejudiced based on who wrote them.
Right.
When we were doing the human face of big data, there was one story that didn't end up in the book because I couldn't have got, I wanted to make sure we weren't putting things in the book we couldn't verify, but I heard the story that now I've heard from many other people is true. There was a programmer at a bank who, when people were applying for loans, he wrote a program that would go to the social, the Facebook and the Twitter and the LinkedIn links of that person and look at what they've been posting and analyze it. And if you listen to rap music, he lowered your score to get a loan with his bank. Mm-hmm. So he was basically saying, oh, if you're black, you probably are not as good a financial risk for my bank. Well, my kids listen to rap music. Yeah. So it was some asshole kid guy programmer who basically built a racist code into this bank's programming and was lowering people, and no one knew that. And someone discovered it, but he just did it on his own. It's almost like this kid that stole the data.
Right. But now you can have a machine do that.
Yeah. So and the trouble is, if we can't look into the black box and see what are the prejudice, what even though this kid thought he was doing something to help protect his bank, I'm not saying he did it nefariously, but obviously it's racist. But what other prejudices are being built in quietly in the background without anybody intentionally doing something evil or bad because someone thinks this is the right, proper thing to do? And we can't look inside the box. And that's one of the things I heard Sam Altman was saying in front of Congress yesterday, is that we want to make the decision-making process more transparent to legislators. I just wonder if this thing's going so fast. I mean,
yeah, well, I think it's a laudable objective. It's just that we don't know whether that's even possible.
And will China and Russia pay any attention at all to the bumpers and the what do you call it, the protective tissue that some people that are, even people like Sam Altman and Elon Musk, are saying, we better be careful here because we're not sure we can put this thing back in the box.
Yeah, no, I think the genie is totally out of the bottle here.
Yeah. So you're asking me the world our children are going to grow up in. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think we're going to look back on this like the invention of electricity, or something that really has a huge impact on our species.
So let's talk about that, because I've been thinking about this as well. Will AI have equivalent or even greater impact than
Than the
electricity
or the internet,
than
right?
previous technologies? How do you think about this?
I think it will.
Yeah, I was actually surprised to hear that. I posed this to a bunch of senior, executives and said, what do you think? And I said, does it seem laughable? And they didn't think there was anything funny about it. They said, no, we think this is actually very possible and likely that it'll be more impactful. Hard to say in what way.
Yeah, I know. Who could have predicted? I mean, remember how idealistic we all were at the beginning of the internet? We all thought, everyone has a voice, and
That's
now
right.
no, there's no more gatekeepers. And now, if you're interesting and you have something to say, you can create your own audience.
That's right. On the internet, no one knows you're a dog.
Yes,
Yeah,
right.
that kind of
And
stuff. Yeah.
yes, it is wondrous. And take away someone's Wi-Fi for 10 minutes, and they're having withdrawal symptoms.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're all completely addicted to and hooked into it in a way where now, my kids say, how did you find any, how did you navigate? How did you drive?
Function? Yeah.
Without Waze, how did the world work? And again, it's like, telling somebody what the world was like before water, if you're a fish. It's like, how did anything work?
Yeah. No, I mean, you're a traveler and you know what it was like traveling in the 70s. And, I went hitchhiking for
I was
3
going to say
months.
hitchhiking.
And, I was not in touch with anyone.
Yeah, I didn't get
for 3
killed.
months. Yeah. You just sort of show up after 3 months, then I'm back.
Yeah, man, I don't know how my parents found me. I don't know how they sent me money when I was in high school to hitchhiking around Europe. We went to American Express and got our mail every 6 weeks.
Yeah. It worked all right.
Yeah, somehow. But now, I like the fact that I can look on my phone right now and see where my son is.
Yeah.
And I talk to my son and daughter a couple times a day, and they're in their 20s. When I went to college, I talked to my parents every 4 months when I needed money.
Yeah, exactly.
Or something. In some ways, we're so much more connected, and maybe it's infantilizing in some way for all of us to be so dependent on these devices.
Yeah, I think you're right. Unfortunately, I agree with that. It has infantilized us.
I grew up a lot faster than my kids.
Yeah.
I think I did.
Yeah.
It's sort of like my wife has to remind me not to do things all the time. Like, when they have a flight, I check in for them and I send them their boarding pass. And my wife said, your daughter's 23. She can learn how to do this now or something.
Like talking about we grew up a lot faster than my kids. Yeah, I remember I was like 5, and in kindergarten, and I was living with my dad was in the army. He was posted in the Congo and the UN peacekeeping thing. And so I went to school, and these kids who were couple of years older than me came and said, if you don't bring 2 rupees tomorrow, we're going to beat you up. So I went home terrified, and I told my grandfather I need 2 rupees. And he said, what? No, go beat him up. That was the way. That was the advice then. So of course I went to school the next day and I just avoided them, as much as I could until I
so extortion at 5 years old.
Yeah,
huh?
but
Wow.
you sort of, exactly. You sort of learn how to sort of navigate that. And yeah, there's I guess there's something positive about it. You just kind of learn to be a little more savvy earlier.
I'm 73 now. I still, it's always fun to ask people how old you feel mentally. I still identify with 28.
I know. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day. He says, every time he passes by a mirror, he's shocked because there's a complete mismatch between his mental age and what he looks like in the mirror. He says, geez, who is that old geezer?
I think it's true of so many people, but I think there's a million reasons I hope I'd live for many years to come. Although I was thinking the other day, probably in 20 years, I'll probably be dead, I'm 70, 93. I don't know, whatever. Not in a morbid way. Just, I wish I could jump ahead right now and look backwards to see what happens.
Yeah.
I'd like to know how the whole Trump saga ends. And I'd like to see how AI, and I'm not putting those two things on equal equivalency. I'm so curious to see how all this is evolving. This weird, I'm not surprised there's people like Trump in the world. I'm surprised there's so many people that fall for the bullshit. This being able to, the thing we've seen over and over again throughout history of being able to, punch down, to demonize minorities, to distract people from what they're doing by setting groups against each other while they're raping and pillaging on the other side. I'm so curious to look back and see how, if and when and how we got through all of this.
Yeah. No, I'm totally on the same page on that. I'm actually wondering where this whole big data and AI thing will how it'll evolve, and whether we actually start paying attention to other things, other than
Just AI.
well, just yeah, or just like GDP or CPI or whatever. It reminds me of this conversation I had with Andrew Yang, who I guess in his book Something Forward, talks about the fact that maybe we should have sort of dashboards that tell us how we're feeling, as a nation, and along a whole bunch
The
of
things we're
criteria.
measuring are not always.
Yeah,
What's that quote that not everything that can be measured should be? There's some. I'm trying to
Yeah.
remember. There was something about the important things not necessarily quantifiable.
Yeah, but we seem to be sort of stuck just measuring, CPI and employment and all that kind of stuff.
Right,
Where there's so much more we could be measuring, just given all the data out there, right, that we could be using to actually report on things.
Wasn't it Burma that measured happiness? There was some country where it seemed laughable at the beginning, and now it's like there's
I know what you're talking about.
There's some countries where there was a country where that measured
I don't know, maybe Estonia or something.
the happiness of their population. And it was a really interesting, the more I thought about it, because how much money you have doesn't necessarily make you happy, right?
Yeah.
Or how famous or how accomplished you are. It's amazing how often you meet people who have very little who seem much happier than people that have a lot. Somehow the people who have a lot, sometimes it's fulfilling with it. It's got to get more and more and more. Whereas people have nothing or very little somehow appreciate what they have. And that's a terrible stereotype, but
no, but as stereotypical as it is, I think there's a lot to it. So I want to talk to you about Tracks, which I thought was such a cool movie. And
did you see the movie?
I did, and the fact that Adam Driver played you, right?
Yeah, talk about surreal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how did that happen? I mean, how did that? How did you end up going to Australia and tracking Robin Davidson walking across the desert? And did you also do some walking?
I did. I was part of a photo agency called Contact, which there's some of the most famous photographers that when I was growing up, there's an organization called Magnum Photos that my father, Elliot, was part of, and it was some of the best photojournalists in the world. And so a group of us formed another agency in competition and in emulation of Magnum called Contact Press Images. And I was the baby of the group. There's 6 of us. It was Annie Leibovitz, Eddie Adams, who shot the picture in Vietnam of the street shooting.
Yeah.
David Burnett, who's an incredible photographer. Douglas Kirkland, who photographed Marilyn Monroe wrapped in a sheet. It was a fantastic. It was like little United Nations of photographers. And I was the baby.
Yeah.
I was the one. They invited me because I said, I'll take. If you guys don't want to do an assignment, a lot of times when you have an agency, magazines come to the agency, say, do you have a photographer that we can send to Bangkok tomorrow to photograph this story? And so a lot of times they'd get assignments that no one wanted to do because they didn't sound very interesting. And because I was the baby, I said, I'll do anything. I don't care. Just any crappy assignment. Because once I got out there, I always made it interesting. I always found something, fly me anywhere in the world. I'll do what you want, and then I'll shoot my own pictures.
Yeah.
So one day, David Burnett, one of the other photographers, said, Pan Am Airlines has come to us, and they have the first nonstop flight from New York to Tokyo. It's an 18-hour flight. You have to fly to Tokyo and then take a picture of 2 guys shaking hands at Narita Airport, get back on the plane and fly back to New York. No offense, but nobody here wants to do it. Do you want to go? So it was like, 38 hours of flying to take a picture of 2 guys shaking hands. So I said, I'll go, but can I get off the plane in Tokyo? And they said, yeah, if it's your money, but you can do whatever you want. So I said, okay. So I was sleeping on my sister's couch in New York because I didn't even live anywhere at that point. And I left on Monday. I told my sister I'll be back on Friday. I came back 11 months later.
Wow.
So I flew to Tokyo.
Yeah.
And once I got there, Time Magazine said, oh, you're in Tokyo. Muhammad Ali is coming to fight like some boxing thing or something. And so I photographed him. And then the Prime Minister of Australia was coming through on the way to China. So they assigned me to spend a week with him. That's where I met him.
Yeah.
And so I spent a week photographing him in Japan. And one day he told me that they had a program where they brought 6 photographers a year to Australia, journalists, because Australia felt left out. They were so far away from the rest of the world. So I went as a guest of the Australian government to Australia. And Time Magazine was thrilled because the Prime Minister of Australia invited one of their journalists there. And they sent me to the outback of Australia to do a cover story about Aborigines. So I flew to Alice Springs, this little town in the middle of the desert. And there was a woman who was a social worker who I was told to contact who could take me to the Aboriginal camps to photograph the Aboriginal elders, ask permission. Mm-hmm. So I walked out of my hotel and I was supposed to make a right and meet this woman in a pub down the street. I have a terrible sense of direction. So instead of making a right, I made a left. And this gorgeous girl was washing the windows of my hotel, 26 years old, blonde hair, blue eyes, and this sarong. And I was 28 years old. I had a camera on my neck, and so I took a picture of her because she was beautiful and the light was gorgeous, and she started screaming at me, "Put your goddamn cameras down. Who the hell do you think you are?" And one of my older friends had said, if people get angry at you, always walk over and apologize. Like, don't ever walk away and make people feel like you were abusing them or something. Right. I found most people, the only time people ever got angry at me for photographing them was usually when people either had a bad self-image or thought you were somehow mocking them or taking something away. So I went over, I said, "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to upset you." I said, "The light was so beautiful on you." And she said, "Oh, you're American?" I said, "Yeah, I'm kind of here working for Time Magazine." It was kind of, ego. I was beating my chest. And she said, "You goddamn parasites. You're probably here to photograph Aborigines?" I said, "Yeah." And she said, "You people feed off their misery. You come in here, you take your pictures of them. It's like, get the hell out of here. It's like, you people you're despicable." I couldn't calm her down. So I tried to apologize. I left. And I found the woman I was supposed to have worked with, and she took me to the camps. I got permission, took my pictures, and I was there for a week. But she said, "What are you doing for dinner tonight?" I said, "I'm going to go back to my hotel room and work on captions and write down roll number 14 was this man at this village." And she said, "Well, a group of us who work with Aborigines are having a dinner party. You might want to come and meet other people involved in the Aboriginal rights movement because they can give you some of their ideas or things you might want to photograph for your time story." So she gave me this address, and I drove to the outside of Alice Springs, and it was this weird-looking abandoned building. The roof was caved in. I thought, again, bad sense of direction. I thought I probably came to the wrong place, but then I heard music and people laughing in the back. I smelled food. So I walked around the back of this abandoned looking house, and there were camels tied up in the backyard. And then I knocked on like the front door of this house that was falling apart. And the girl that had been washing the windows of my hotel, answered the door and was not happy to see me. Like, "What the hell are you doing here?"
Again.
I said, "Your friend invited me to a dinner party." And she said, "Well, put your cameras down. You can't photograph my friends." Like, "Okay." I said, "Why do you have camels in the backyard?" And she said, "None of your business." So I went to the woman that had been helping me. I said, "What's with your friend? Like, I didn't kill her dog. I took a picture of her." And she said, "Oh, Robin's this weird girl that showed up here 2 years ago. We don't know very much about her, but she's decided she's going to walk 2,000 miles from here through the Gibson Desert out to the Indian Ocean with her camels." And I said, "Why?" And she says, "We don't know. We told her we want to go with her because we're afraid she's going to die, and she won't let anybody come with her. She wants to do this all by herself." So it's pretty weird. And so, I had dinner there, and she wouldn't even talk to me. She was like really hostile. And so, I worked with the social worker the rest of the week, and the day came for me to leave, and I was thanking her. I said, "Thank you. I hope, you're happy with my story, and thank you for your help." And she said, "Oh, I almost forgot. Remember the girl with the camels?" I said, "Yeah, a little hard to forget." She said, "Well, she wants to ask you a favor, but she's kind of embarrassed because she wasn't very, very nice to you." And I'm trying to think, what possible favor would this woman want? My picture. I mean, and I said, "Well, what did she want?" And she said, "Well, she wrote to National Geographic, asked if they would give her money because she's been, washing windows and waiting on assholes in pubs. And she's been here for 2 years trying to raise the money for this trip. And she wrote to National Geographic. They never even answered her. And she thought, do you have any connections there? Do you know anybody there?" And I said, I'm 28 years old. And I said, my career is really just starting. I said, I've been to a workshop with the editor of National Geographic a year ago. I don't know if you'd even remember me, but tell her she can use my name for what it's worth. And so she said, "Okay." And I left, and I flew back to New York. This is still part of the 11 months. And the phone rings a week later. I'm in my sister's couch again. And my sister said, "Some guy from National Geographic." And I said, "Okay." And I totally forgot about the conversation. And so it's the editor of National Geographic, Bob Gilka, and he said, "Is this Rick Smolan?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "We got a letter from this woman in Australia about this camel trip. And it sounds really interesting. We're thinking of funding her trip. Is she a nutcase or is she for real? Because we don't want the headline, National Geographic Explorer dies in week 2 in Outback. And I said, well, she's very intense. She's very focused. I've seen her maps. I saw her camels. I was trying to think, I don't want to say she's totally insane, and really hostile. He said, well, since you guys are such good friends, would you like to be the photographer that we would assign to document her trip? You're an outback kind of guy. You like outward bound. You were like a camper, a hiker, mountain climber. I wasn't even a Boy Scout. And I said, oh yes, I have all of those things. I'm your man. So I fly back to Australia and I go back to Alice Springs and she says, what are you doing here? I said, remember you asked to use my name to get funding and they agreed to fund your trip? And she said, wait, I said, no, you're not coming on my trip. I said, that's the deal. They're giving you the money because they want me to photograph your trip. And I'm going to have to fly out 5 times during your trip to find you and photograph you. And she said, no. I'm going to take the pictures. And I said, well, okay, no offense, but you are the subject. You're not the photographer. And she said, well, no, I don't even want my friends here, let alone some jerk from New York. I said, you're welcome. And so I said, well, then give them back the money because that's the deal. I mean, I'm sorry excuse me for helping you raise the money. And she said, well, I guess I'm stuck with you. And I said, again, you're welcome. So I go off on this insane adventure following this woman who I fall madly in love with because she hates me. Yeah. Most beautiful woman I'd ever met. And so interesting. I mean, every conversation with her was like, she was always like poking me. Yeah. Like, first of all, she didn't want me there, right? So in a way, she was trying to drive me away. But I remember the first week out there, she said, it was the insult of the day. She said, you Americans treat friendship like Valium. I said, what's that supposed to mean? She said, well, every time I see Americans together, you're all going, don't worry, it'll all be fine. Everything will work out. I said, that's a bad thing. And she goes, yeah, because in Australia, if you care for someone, if you worry about them, if they're your friend, your mate, your lover, whatever, and they're doing something stupid, they're doing drugs, they're marrying the wrong person, you hit them over the head with a goddamn 2x4. You don't coddle them. You guys are all like, you're afraid to, you claim you're friends, but you're afraid to lose your friendship by actually being a friend. Like, you need to risk the friendship. I mean, it was so, I was like, whoa, it's like somebody going like that and slapping you. It's like, that's really interesting. I mean, I can't speak on behalf of all Americans, but, and then once I showed up about like 2 months later, and I just, in between shooting her story, I was freelancing. So I was shooting stories for Time, for Geo, for New York Times. So I found her. I just come from Taiwan. I was shooting a cover story in Taiwan for Time. And I was worried my film had gotten X-rayed. And on the way back to New York, because there were so many things that go wrong. You do all these things and then you ship your film back. You have no idea. Did they mess it up in developing? Did it get X-rayed? Was the film stock good in the first place? Yeah. There's all these, did my camera have dust in it? So I was going on to her about, oh my God, I hope these pictures are okay. And I hope they don't get ruined. And then I said, I was thinking, when I leave you, I'm going to leave my car 300 miles ahead at this Aboriginal mission. And she looks at me, she goes, when are you going to get here? I said, well, I'm going to be back in about 6 weeks. She said, no, now. I said, what do you mean? She goes, when are you going to get here now? I said, and I thought she was nuts. So I said, Robin, you haven't seen anybody in 6 weeks. I'm not a hallucination. I'm actually here. She goes, no, you're not. And I'm going, oh my God, she's really gone crazy. And she said, you tell me how you want to spend time with me and be out here with me. And you get out here and all you do is talk about where you've been or where you're going. You're never fucking here. It's like, you're never in the moment. You're always lost in your head somewhere. It's like, whoa. I mean, it was like, now you go to restaurants, you see people with their girlfriends and husbands and they're all on their phones and they're not with each other. Yeah. They're somewhere else. And I remember, again, it was just like somebody slapping you in the face saying, be here now. It's like the present. Like, just stop your brain from being, and every conversation with her was like so thought provoking. Yeah. So she got attacked by wild camels. She got lost. She ran out of water. Every time I left her, I was terrified I'd never see her again. I always thought she was going to die out there. there's snakes, there's centipedes, there's crazy people. There's no police out there. I mean, a beautiful woman alone in the desert, and there weren't many people there, but there would be the occasional guy. I mean, a lot of the criminals would escape into the desert, from the cities. So I remember I would look in the rearview mirror of my car every time I left her, and think, would this be my last memory of her? And one day I was in Hong Kong, and again, working with Time Magazine, and the writer I was working with came down to breakfast. We were staying at the Hilton Hotel, and he was kind of pale, and he said, "You better sit down." I said, "What's going on?" He said, just sit down. And he hands me the local Hong Kong paper, the English language paper, and it says, "Mysterious camel lady missing in Gibson Desert, desperate search underway." I remember my heart just stopped, because again, this was my girlfriend at that point, and I was so freaked out. I thought, oh my God, the thing I was worried about the most has happened. So I don't remember how I got down to Australia. I remember we stopped in Perth, and they brought newspapers on the plane, and on the front of every paper in Australia were my photographs. So obviously National Geographic had started, the story hadn't been published yet.
Yeah.
So somebody back in Washington had given my pictures out to help the search. So I thought, okay, she's dead. I mean, it was obvious that why would they give away pictures before their story appeared?
Right.
So I flew, I rented a plane. People said, how did you find her? I mean, she's in the middle of the desert and you left her. How would you track her down in between? First of all, the Aborigines always knew where she was. As long as I could find an Aboriginal settlement or mission or cattle station, I'd just say, have you seen the camel lady? That's what everybody called her.
Yeah.
And even though she would say, I haven't seen anybody in a month, they could lead me right to her. Yeah. They were tracking her the whole time. And the second thing was that, when I would leave her, I would say, I'm going to be back in 6 weeks. You're walking about 20 miles a day. So in 6 weeks, you should be about to this cattle station or this little town or whatever. So I had a rough idea of where she would be when I came back. So I flew to this town, Wiluna, which is where she would have been if she was still alive. And then I went to the Aboriginal mission there. I said, have you seen the camel lady? And they said, oh yeah, she's 20 miles out of town. What happened was all these reporters had shown up in Perth looking for the camel lady because the story was all over the world. And so I led all these journalists to her. She knew nothing. She wasn't lost. She would never, and it looked to her like I just brought 40 journalists to ruin her trip. And before I could say anything, they were thrusting these newspapers in her face. Yeah. And I'm saying, so I took her aside and she said, what the hell are you doing? Why did you bring these people here? Are you crazy? Like, you just betrayed me. I said, no. I said, I didn't bring them here. All over the world, people think you're missing. And she said, well, why would anybody think I'm missing? I haven't even seen anybody. And I said, well, did anything happen? And she said, oh my God, it was the racing driver. I said, the what? She said, oh God. She said, 6 weeks ago, in the middle of the night, I hear this loud noise and these lights in the middle of the desert. And this guy comes, he screeches up, sees her campfire. She said he was a racing car driver who was breaking the world's record of driving from one side of Australia. He was driving from Perth to Sydney. Mm-hmm. And she said he hit on me and I told him to piss off. And she said he had this car with these big fat tires that could go over sand and rocks. And it turns out when he got to Sydney, they said, oh, you broke the world's record. Congratulations. What was the most interesting, memorable part of your journey? And he said, oh, I spent a romantic night in the moonlight with a naked camel lady. He made up this whole story of how he had this affair with her in the middle of the night. Yeah. And so everyone's looking for the naked camel lady. To his point, she didn't wear clothes a lot. She, for some reason, wanted to walk naked during a lot of the trip. And I didn't want to send pictures of her naked, the woman I was in love with, back to these old guys in suits in Washington. So I would develop all my film in Sydney or Perth or Melbourne and only send them what I wanted them to see. And you're not allowed to do that. The Geographic, you are not allowed to develop your own film when you work for the Geographic. So I was getting telegrams saying, you broke your contract. You're never going to work for us again. You're destroying your career. And I said, oh, I was worried there was dust in my camera and I was trying to, but I kept doing it. And they kept threatening me. And I said to her, I am, you come first. I don't care about my career. I don't care about the story about you. All I care about is you getting out of this alive. And so I thought I was committing professional suicide. Turned out when the story appeared, they were so happy with the pictures. Everybody forgot they'd ever been angry at me. And they never saw the pictures of her walking around naked. So anyway, we couldn't get rid of these journalists. All these paparazzi, they were like flies, right? And so now there's like 40 guys with camper vans around her camels. So I was trying to think of what do we do? And she said, well, my trip's over. I'm just going to have to quit. I have to get a truck, come pick up the camels. And which of course would have destroyed the story. So I was sitting there trying to think what to do. And I said, you know what? I'm going to have everybody out. These were small towns. So every time there was a telegram, everyone in town read it. Like the woman at the post office would get the telegram, but then tell everybody. So I actually managed to somehow reach a friend of mine back in Melbourne. And I sent him a telegram saying, Robin is calling the trip off because the journalists are here. And so she's going to have a truck come out and pick them up. And then in the middle of the night, one night when all the guys were asleep, I hid her in my car and told them I was going for beer, which was like 20 miles away to this little town. I was going to bring beer back for everybody, but she hid in my car. And another one of her friends, it's a long story, but another of her friends, I'd flown one of her friends out. And so her friend stayed with the camels. And then she and I stayed in this town in Wimbledon for 10 days, knowing that her friend could take care of the camels. And then they woke up in the morning and Robin was gone and I was gone. And her friend was there and saying, I'm just going to camp till the van shows up, and their budgets ran out. So after like 4 days, they all gave up and left. And then we came back and she continued the trip. So this is a very long answer to your question, but I kept telling her to write a book. I said, to keep a journal. I said, someday you're going to want to write a book about this. And she said, why do you have to turn everything into a product? Why do you have to commercialize everything? Why can't you just have an experience and have the experience and not be marketing it and packaging it and promoting it? And I said, okay, I'm just saying that someday you might want to. I didn't do this to get famous. I didn't do this to write a book. She never told anybody why she was doing it. So after the trip was over, about a month later, she called and said, you're not going to believe this, but I'm writing a book. I said, oh my God, really? I said, do you want my notes and journals? And she said, no, I think I can write it. And she sent me a draft of the book and she said, I want you to read it because I'm not very nice to you in it. So I'm this asshole from New York.
Yeah.
Who's driving me crazy. I get better as the book goes on.
Yeah.
So Diane Keaton tried to buy the rights to the story to play Robin. That didn't happen. Then Julia Roberts was cast as Robin. That didn't happen. Then Helen Hunt was cast as Robin. And every 5 years, I'd get a call from Hollywood.
Yeah.
And I'd have this whole conversation like, oh, we want you to be a consultant on the movie. We want your perspective on Robin. And my friend, who's an entertainment lawyer, said, look at the contract they send you. All they want you to do is sign away your life rights, and they're going to make you into the asshole. He said, my friend said, I guarantee you're going to be the irritating fly in the ointment because, so I'd have the same conversation with these Hollywood people every 5 years and nothing would happen. I met Helen Hunt, who was absolutely delightful. That didn't happen. Then it was going to be Nicole Kidman. That didn't happen. So literally for 30 years, this conversation went on. And then 7 years ago, I got a call one day from some Australian guy and he said, is this Rick Smolan? I said, yeah. And he goes, my name is Emil Sherman. He said, I'm the producer of The King's Speech. And I said, oh my God, congratulations. They just won the Oscar.
Yeah.
And he said, I just want to let you know that we're making the movie about Robin. I said, no offense, but I've had this conversation now 6 times with different members of your community. He said, no. He said, we've got the funding. We're making the movie. We've cast Mia Wasikowska as Robin. He said, do you have any suggestions of who you'd like to play you? And I said, Gordon Joseph Levitt, the son in Third Rock from Son. I think he's a wonderful actor. And he said, we could never afford him. We've got to get somebody that's sort of more entry level. There's this guy, Adam Driver, in this movie, in this TV series, Girls, which I'd never seen. I'd heard of it. So I watched the first episode and he's this really sleazy, horrible guy in the first episode. And, I thought, oh my God, of all the people, and he wants to meet you. And so, they set up a meeting for me and Adam in New York. And, he was delightful and really almost shy. I mean, it's funny. I remember he wouldn't make eye contact. He kept looking down the whole time, which is very odd. Yeah. And then he said, he says, I don't know how to hold a camera. I said, what do you mean? He goes, I take pictures with my iPhone. Like, I'm going to be playing you in the Outback, and I've never changed a roll of film. I don't even know what you're supposed to do with the camera. And I was in the middle of doing the Human Face of Big Data project. And we were like 2 weeks away from shooting and I didn't have time. So David Burnett, who gave me the ticket to Japan in the first place all those years ago. Ended up spending a day with Adam and another young guy named Josh Hayner from the New York Times, who taught him how to use a camera and everything. So they flew Robin and me back to Australia to be on the set to watch them making the movie, which was beyond surreal. They actually built the sets using my photographs. So it was like watching my pictures come to life. They asked me if I wanted to be in the movie. I said, as what? And they said, well, we'll cast you in some small role in the movie. So my kids, of course, were delighted. So I'm the park ranger at Ayers Rock. When she gets turned away, there's a place where she wants to come to the camels at Ayers.
Was that you?
That was me. Yeah. So they have a makeup trailer in the middle. They shot this in the desert, you know. Yeah. So they said, I just come from New York and it was December and I was completely pale. And they said, no, we need to make you look totally, sunburned and like an outback guy. So I'm sitting there in the makeup trailer and all around the mirror are pictures of me from my whole life, like from high school, from college, from my yearbook. I said, where did you get these pictures and why are they around the mirror? He said, well, Adam wanted to see how you hold your face, how you gesture. Mm-hmm. He actually spent a day with me during the Human Face of Big Data and came to a seminar I was doing. So Mia was next to me and they were putting makeup on her. And then Adam walked in and she said, Rick, so what time is the shoot? And I started to respond and then Adam answered and I said, like, what? And she said, we're shooting on film and the director told us to call each other by our stage names because if we're shooting and suddenly we say the wrong name. So it was so weird. They were calling each other. And I have a picture of Adam. Adam and Mia got along really well. They were horsing around. He was giving her piggyback rides. And I was saying to Robin, wouldn't it be weird if they fell in love during the shooting? Like this whole thing is so weird. So they finished the movie. They said, we'd like to screen it for you by yourself before you see this with your family and friends. And we're going to set up a little screening room for you in a movie theater. So I went to this movie theater with like 40 seats and I'm the only person in it. I was so excited. I got popcorn and a Coca-Cola, which I never drink Coke, but I was going to sit back and enjoy this. And the movie starts showing and I start having an anxiety attack. It was the weirdest thing. My heart started beating and I broke into a sweat. And Adam in the movie is a complete fucking asshole at the beginning of the movie. And the one thing I said to them, they said, I said, the one thing I said, look, every time I've seen a movie in Hollywood, a Hollywood movie about it, where there's a photographer, they're always a parasite. They're always feeding off the main character. They're always this jerk. And I said, we would never do that. Your role is so important in this movie. You're like the lifeline for Robin during the trip, blah, blah, blah. And so I'm sitting in the theater and there I am. It's like every stereotype. And I was so angry and I called the director. I said, like, what the fuck? The one thing I asked you guys, I said, you can use my pictures for free. I didn't charge you anything. I gave them a lot of feedback about Robin and he said, I know we promised you, but like, first of all, he said, we need the arc of your character. He said, by the end of the movie, you're a really good guy, right? Yeah. I said, I know, but at the beginning, I'm a complete asshole. And he says, I know, but we needed to, it's not interesting if you're a nice guy throughout the whole movie. It's exactly what my lawyer and my brother had told me was going to happen. Yeah. And he said, the other thing is every time Adam's on screen, even when he's being a jerk, the women just melt. And my daughter, who I think was 15 at the time, said, Dad, he's ugly hot. and when I saw it at the Toronto Film Festival, they were right. I mean, every time Adam's on the screen, and this is one of his first movies after Girls. And he's such a nice guy. I mean, I've seen him several times since, and my God, his career. Then he got cast in Star Wars, and then he was in Spike Lee's movie. Was it KKK, whatever it was? Just he's in so many films now, and all the other actors love him.
Apparently, Spike Lee apparently is making a movie on AI.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's what I heard.
I heard this morning they're doing a Beetlejuice 2. I just read that with Winona Ryder and Michael Keaton. Totally off topic here, but yeah.
So what happened, by the way? So what's Robin doing now?
She eventually we broke up, and she did another camel trip in India. They asked me if I wanted to photograph it. The Geographic offered it to me, but I decided I survived the first one, and I was kind of heartbroken when we broke up. So that was a little hard to get over. But we remained friends, and then she lived in India for 15 years with an Indian prince who she fell in love with, and then he died. and then she moved back to Australia and lives south of Melbourne now. And she just finished writing her memoir. She's written many books. Her book Tracks. Did you ever read Catcher in the Rye?
Yes.
So in America, that was a book that I think all of us in high school read.
Yeah.
So in Australia, every high school student reads Tracks.
Wow.
It's like required reading.
Uh-huh.
When Tracks, the movie, was being produced, I went back to all my photographs and I did it. First of all, I found pictures that I disagreed with the Geographic in terms of what pictures they chose for the issue. But again, I was 28 years old. I wasn't about to tell them they were wrong. But even at the time, I didn't agree with their picture selection. So I did a big coffee table book with the photographs. And then they also let me use stills from the movie and the screenplay. But the last 3 books I've done, the first being The Human Face of Big Data, these coffee table books are now smartphone enabled. So you can point your camera at different pictures in the book. So in the Tracks book, you could actually point it at my photograph of Robin, and then it plays that scene in the movie.
Yeah.
And it's really weird because since they built the sets from the photographs, it's like watching other people step into the photographs. And the Good Fight book likewise has 63 different videos in it, TED Talks, YouTube videos, commercials that expand the reader's understanding of racism or prejudice or achievements by these different groups.
Yeah, great idea.
So sorry for talking your ear off here.
No, fascinating story. So Rick, like, just to kind of wrap up here with advice to young people, like what sort of advice do you give to young people, both who want to sort of get into this? I don't know. I don't even know what to call it. Not line of business.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure being a photographer right now is a great career choice. I sound like my father.
I a few years ago I had Ali Belshi on the show, and I asked him. I said, would you advise people to be going into like broadcast journalism? I'm not entirely sure about his response, but it was not. He wasn't enthusiastic about it. It was just like, yeah, if you got a burning for it, sure, but I don't know if I would advise people to do it.
There'll always be a need for storytelling. I think that's how we talk to each other, whether it's around the campfire as cavemen or whether it's, 3D, VR, all immersive Apple headset. Yeah. I think it's the story that really pulls people in. So I started out telling stories with still pictures, but I think that now there, if you're a journalist, if journalism storytelling is what you're interested in, you need to be able to record sound, you shoot video, take still pictures, write, being able to synthesize or encapsulate a situation in a way that is compelling to other people. Yeah. I mean, if you look at all the books I've been lucky enough to work on with all these really talented people, those captions you mentioned, every one of them is like a mini story. Yeah. And exactly. We wrote them that way.
In fact, yeah, exactly. I mean, those are long captions, and I remember thinking like, wow, I wonder if a computer could do this.
I mean, I want something where you can't wait to tell your spouse or your best friend or your kids, you got to look at this picture. Yeah. I mean, you won't believe this photograph. You won't believe this story. I think the world's such an interesting place. I think people are,
by the way, the storytelling thing, right? I mean, I guess you have to be better at doing this than AI would be by itself, right? We talked about earlier about, you probably get displaced by people who use AI better. As opposed to being displaced by AI. But I'm thinking here, your storytelling had actually better be better than what ChatGPT could do on its own, given a prompt.
If you think about it, though, if ChatGPT basically consumes, absorbs, ingests every movie by Steven Spielberg and by J.J. Abrams, and maybe it's going to be a great storyteller. I don't know. I mean, maybe you'd say, give me a new version of this. I mean, I don't want to discount what, as I said, once a robot learns something, they all know it. So once these ChatGPTs have all of human storytelling throughout history, there are certain, 3-act plays, narratives, certain structures that human beings are always attracted to, whether it's love stories or horror stories or comedies or whatever. Yeah. The thing that I think about is I used to teach at the Stanford Publishing course every summer. I would give a talk and then I would stay and learn from all the other speakers. And there was a woman who came who was in direct mail marketing. And I was always interested in both of the business side of publishing and the creative side. And I remember she said something really interesting. She said, we found that, she said, have you ever gotten these, this is, again, I'm dating myself, but have you ever gotten these mailings from like Reader's Digest where there's a pencil inside the envelope or a penny, or you look at the coupon and it's at an angle, or there's a drawing of a scissors intersecting the dotted lines around it. And she said, that's not random. We've actually tested this. And she said, here's the interesting thing. We send out 3 million of these things to people. And there's a penny in the envelope you have to stick here, or there's, something you have to cut, or we angle some element in the offer. And we found that little weird design element, 3%, we get a 3% higher response rate because we did something that caught your eye. She said, but the weirdest thing is 6 months later, it stops working. And I said, I remember raising my hand, what do you mean it stops working? She said, we sent this out to 3 million people, and for 6 months, we're seeing a 3% higher response rate. And then all of a sudden, it no longer works. So I'm wondering if ChatGPT is simply replicating what it thinks people want, then that wears out. You maybe still need the human beings to come up with a new idea, a new twist, something.
Right.
I mean, it is amazing when
it's like, where does the sort of new information come into the system?
Yeah, it's
right?
not just regurgitating everything that's been there already.
We've kind of trained the machine because it's had all this data, but if that stops, then it runs out of training data.
Yeah, although again, I wouldn't rule out. I mean, I think that we're watching something we never experienced before. I think AI represents,
indeed, and in fact, it's actually observing all kinds of stuff even without our realization. Right? So that's kind of the world we're moving towards.
I mean, look at Squid Games. Did you watch Squid Game?
I'm not. No.
Wow. I mean, unbelievably violent, unbelievably creative, original, unbelievable characters that you cared about. I don't think generative AI could have imagined that.
Yeah.
But maybe if I said create a series of games based in Korea, based on childhood games that as adults people have to compete with each other to win a prize to get out of poverty, maybe it would have come up with that.
Yeah.
It's worth watching, by the way. I was surprised my wife watched it because she doesn't like violent things, but the characters were so engaging. One of the things I love about Netflix, they're so smart, is I lived in Spain for a year when I was 16. I lived with a family for a year, my junior year of high school. And I remember thinking there's different music, food, customs, clothing, things that I would have never, ever even known about in America. Like their top 10 was not our top 10. Now it's kind of global. And then I still realized, oh my God, there's like hundreds of versions of this. Like, everything I just experienced in Spain, if I lived in France or I lived in Saudi Arabia or Japan.
Yeah.
And it just makes me think that as a species, there's so many things. So what Netflix did is they went around the world and found the most popular TV shows in other countries, like Money Heist in Spain. Did you see that one?
Great show.
Wow.
Great show.
Wow,
Yeah.
right?
You got to watch it in Spanish.
Oh, but so original, so
Casa
creative.
de Papel.
And yeah, Casa de Papel.
Yeah.
But it didn't do that well in Spain. It actually was not a huge hit. No, when it came out, it was not a huge hit. But after Netflix put it on, it became a global phenomenon. In fact, the cast couldn't believe it because in Spain it had been like a C+. That's
amazing.
So good.
Yeah, so good.
I mean, they milked it. I mean, too many seasons. It kind of got watered down. But so Netflix very inexpensively picked up these incredible shows all over the world, did a great job of dubbing, and now has brought them to a global audience. So every one of those shows is in 40 languages. It's brilliant.
Yeah. Wow.
So, I mean, does generative AI come up with I don't know.
Yeah, I know. No, I'm sort of a half glass full kind of guy myself.
Yeah.
So I'm just excited about technology. I'm scared shitless as well, but I'm sort of hopeful we'll figure it out.
It's not going away.
No, it's not going away. But
I mean, I have a lot of friends who say, I don't want to know about it. It's like, it's too scary. I said, well, you better learn about it because it's not going away. The genie's out of the bottle. So all you can do right now is get out and learn how to ride the horse.
Indeed.
Because otherwise you're going to get trampled.
Indeed. Well said. Well, Rick, this has been fascinating. Thanks so much.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. No, it's loved hearing all of these stories. Fascinating to sort of put things together. I learned a lot just sort of, getting ready for this conversation. So it was fascinating.
So two things, if I can share with your audience. So if they're interested in learning more about Robin and her trip, I gave a talk to the National Geographic community. So if you go to www.robinstory.com, not Robin's story, but robinstory.com, And then there's one we didn't talk about at all, which I'll also just share with your audience, called Natasha Story.
Oh, that was a fascinating story.
Which was a direct result. So if we have one more minute.
Yes, absolutely.
So at the end of Robin's journey, when she got to the ocean, and she said, "Could I just get to the ocean by myself and not have you there?" And I said, "Robin, I have to photograph you when you get to the ocean with the camels." And she said, "All right." And those, of course, are some of my favorite pictures, and some of her favorite pictures. She hated my pictures, by the way, at the beginning. She said I made her look like a goddamn model. She didn't know how beautiful she was, which is probably good. But at the end of her trip, she said, "So I have to ask you a question." I said, "What?" She said, "Are you going to go back to being a prostitute?" I said, "Oh my God, you're still doing this to me? Like, what part?" She said, "No, I mean this in a good way." I said, "Okay, wait, what part of asking me if I'm going to go back to being a prostitute is good?" She said, "Okay, before my trip, I feel like everything you did was because someone hired you, they paid you to go care about something for a week or a month, and then they would pay you to care about something else. You're a prostitute, you're a journalist, but you didn't care about these things. They wound you up and they sent you off." And she said, "I feel like with my trip, you were here because you were in love with me and because you liked what I was doing and found it interesting. And you put me ahead of your career. You put me ahead of the magazine." And she said, "So my question to you is, are you going to go back to waiting for someone else to wind you up and pay you to care about something and being a prostitute? Or are you going to find something that you care about and you're going to use your skills as a photographer to try to change change the topic," which is exactly what all my friends years later had talked about, the day in life books. So I found out that there were 40,000 children who had been fathered by American GIs all over Asia, and they'd gotten women pregnant, whether they were everyday women or prostitutes, whatever, and then abandoned these children. So these kids were being born, some of whom looked very Western. They were either, black or Caucasian or whatever. And in many of these countries, they're very xenophobic in many of these countries. So anyone that looked differently was ostracized, beaten up, punished. Nobody would marry them. Nobody would hire them. And it was just absolutely tragic. So I made a lot of money from Robin's trip, half of which I always gave to her, by the way. And I used my portion of the money I decided I would not wait for a magazine, and I would go off and do a story about children who had been fathered by GIs. In the middle of doing the story, I was left an 11-year-old child in an old Korean woman's will. That's all I'll say. But
I know, that's a fascinating story.
So if your audience is interested, it's www.natashastory.com, and it's by far, even more than Robin's story, the most satisfying thing in my life. And Natasha and Robin are still, I'm still very connected to both of them, but Natasha is sort of like my first kid. I didn't raise her. My best friends raised her, but the story is pretty remarkable.
It is really remarkable. It's really moving. Very much so. Yeah, in fact, at the end of the podcast, we put show notes, so I'll, put the links to that.
Okay. It's a TED Talk, so that's where it takes you to the TED website.
Yeah.
So thank you again for letting me blather on here. This is 5 cups of coffee this morning.
Fascinating. I'm glad you had those 5 cups, Rick. It was great listening to you, and thanks for coming down.
Of course, thank you.
And these things are so much better face to face than over the internet.
That's funny. I think radio, for some reason, storytelling again, because I like podcast, video stuff, but for some reason, podcasts and conversations are more intimate than when you're seeing the people.
Yeah.
I guess because you imagine it all in your head or something.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Awesome.
Right, thank you.
Good stuff. Thanks, Rick.
Thanks.